You know, in this whole budget resolution stuff, I neglect to point out this debt ceiling stuff that comes a little more than a week or two later, and Nancy Pelosi says there's really nothing left to cut.
And I just have to point out that President Clinton, President Bush, President Reagan, and this president have all negotiated the debt ceiling and given up something for that. So why now is it just, no, we can't do this?
Because the cupboard is there. There's no more cuts to make. It's really important that people understand that.
Think of that. If that's the thing in Washington, will we ever rein in spending in Washington? Public notices. Gretchen Hamill has some ideas where they could start. Let's get right to it, Gretchen, because this is all about finding solutions. What was the first thing you would start cutting?
Well, I think you have to look at some of the longer-term issues that we have with our entitlement programs. I mean, just like $1.4 billion was made in disabled payments, improperly made in disabled payments to people who had jobs. $44 billion was wasted in Medicare given to people who didn't need it. And if you go on and you look at the other programs that we have in our government, there's tons of examples like this. We created a whole wiki site called Spendopedia that lists out hundreds of examples that we can actually go in and cut.
All right, but a lot of those are, and we're showing some just to sort of rocket along here, but on the catfish stuff and looking at, you know, military uniform spending, it's in the millions. And I always argue, you know, you add it up and you're talking a significant amount of change, but it's nothing approaching the change you're talking about with multi-billion adjustments and the growth of entitlements and the rest. But you have to start somewhere, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a longer-term problem. I mean, reform has always been a tough issue for Washington to take on, and it's always what they call the third rail. But if you look at some of the other programs we can cut, you can cut $14 million in a duplicative catfish program that was started back in 2008. And Department of Defense wastes $82 million every year just by its uniform services. If they streamlined their uniform services, created a more efficient program, they would save $82 million. And you have to go in and look at some of the ways the USDA has been spending its money. It's actually subsidizing homeowners in Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard, of all places where some of the richest, most famous people live, they're getting subsidies because they're a royal area.
All right, but you know, a lot of people always listen to this, and I always get this, you know, these are pennies on the dollar, Neil, and you're losing sight of how much these programs mean to people. You know, you raise a very good example about the Martha's Vineyard thing. That's news to me. But I always say you have to start somewhere, and if you were to address all these so-called ancillary programs, all of these issues, you would be cutting a serious amount of money, just like it gets back to 48 million Americans on some sort of food assistance. We're not saying starve them, but we're saying, do we need 48 million Americans to be getting this? And that gets back to the basic question, where's our money going?
Where's our money going? As taxpayers, we need to know what our government is doing with its money. And that's why we have a petition on our website to call for transparency when it comes to how the government is spending our dollars. I mean, we see this waste and frivolous abuse all day long, and everyone knows that it's easy to spend someone else's money, but it's hard to spend your own money. And every American out there knows that, you know, pennies on the dollar, cutting your coffee, cutting this, cutting that in your home budget makes a difference over the long haul. And that's the mentality that Washington needs to take. It's not a Santa Claus policies that we need to continue handing out everything to everyone who wants something. We have to think about what our priorities and what the role and the responsibilities of government and start from there.
Gretchen, thank you very, very much. And to hear my guest tonight on Fox Business tell it, David Stockton, you remember the guy Ronald Reagan took to the woodshed? He's ready to light her up and just get crazy. He says that the Tea Partiers have it right, that you have to make a statement. Defunding Obamacare is a start. It might strike some of you more on the mainstream as being a little bit risky. David Stockton spells it out detail by detail why it could be a very smart strategy.